Welcome to our members today. Welcome to our witnesses to the joint meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance and the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology this Tuesday, June 9th, 2009. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, we are studying the credit card interchange system and the debit payment system in Canada. And before us today, we have four witnesses. We have Mr. Ian Lee, who is Director of the MBA program at the Sprott School of Business in Carleton University. We have Barry Skolnick, who is Associate Professor at the School of Business in the University of Alberta. We have Mr. Roger Ware, who is Professor in the Department of Economics in Queen's University. And we have Mr. Jack Carr, who is Professor in the Department of Economics in the University of Toronto. So welcome to all four of you, and we'll begin. Yes, Mr. Menzies, go ahead.
Point of order. Don't mean to delay proceedings here, but just we have a housekeeping issue. The Finance Committee has invited the Finance Minister to come to specifically the Finance Committee. He's only able to come because he's traveling on the day that we had asked him to come. He's only able to come the morning of the 16th. I would beg your indulgence that we be able to convene the Finance Committee on the morning of the 16th from 9 till 10 to hear the Minister of Finance, and perhaps we can reschedule the Joint Committee, the next meeting of the Joint Committee, till later.
Well, I believe discussions have been had with the various parties involved, and I think members are amenable to that. So we'll get the clerks of the two respective committees to coordinate to reschedule our meeting of next week, Tuesday. Thank you. So without further ado, we'll begin with opening statements from our four witnesses, beginning with Mr. Carr.
Thank you very much. I thank the committee for inviting me here today. I should tell you, and I'm sure it exists with my colleagues, that professors are used to speaking in 50-minute segments, not 5. So it's going to be a little difficult. I have a paper that should be handed out, so the things I leave out is in the paper. It's not a long paper. And I should also tell you that my research has primarily been financed by Visa. So let me get to it, given the time I have. The key feature of the credit card system is the nature of that it's a two-sided market. And a two-sided market is somewhat different than markets economists generally deal with. A two-sided market is a market where, in the credit card business, the two sides are the merchants and the cardholders. There's an interrelationship between the two sides. You can't run the system without cardholders. You can't run the system without merchants. The more cardholders there are, the better it is for merchants. The more merchants they are, the better it is for cardholders. It's like a network, and there are these interdependence on both sides. Cardholder demand for system services depend upon other things, on the level of cardholder fees, the value the cardholder places on the convenience of using the cards over other means of payments, and on the number and quality of merchants participating in the system. And essentially, merchants' demand is very similar. They depend on merchants' fees, the efficiency of accepting cards over other means of payments, and on the number and quality of cardholders. Okay, so the point I want to emphasize right from the very beginning is that this two-sided nature of the market really makes the economics somewhat different than normally. Now, there's three important points about the payment system. One, it's important to remember that the issuing and acquiring identities are through the payment system organization jointly engaged in the production and supply of services. It's joint production. Second, it's important to understand the two-sided nature of this market. Now, Evans and Schmalensee sort of give a real-world example. In Asia particularly, there are these dating clubs. And in dating clubs, men and women can go and meet one another and see if they are suiting each other's needs. Now, it seems to be that men value these clubs more than women. And what generally happens in these clubs, it's just as costly for the owner of the club to service the women in the club and the men and to bring them in, but it's generally the case that women are not charged, even sometimes they're given free drinks, and men pay all the costs. Now, seems fair. And it's done in order to operate an efficient system. It's done because men won't come if there's no women, women won't come if there's no men. You have to balance the system. And the way you balance the system is like through an interchange fee. You, in fact, have men pay this fee, and not related at all to cost. The third economically important feature of two-sided markets is that both sides of the market benefit from the growth in demand of the other side. Now, recently, there have been challenges to four-party systems, particularly in Australia and a number of other countries, and in this country too. There are two important points to understand. First, that merchants, people argue, people who criticize the system argue that merchants should not be required to cover any of the costs borne by the issuers of providing the services to cardholders, since retailers argue, they don't receive any benefits from them. It's claimed that a collectively set interchange fee imposes such costs on merchants. Accordingly, retailers urge that the interchange fee should be calculated on the basis of an objective cost standard, which excludes costs not related to payment networks. Second, it's argued that rules such as honor all card rules and no surcharge rules effectively force retailers to accept Visa and MasterCard. Now, I'm going to argue that there are flaws in these arguments. And particularly, I argue about 5 flaws. Flaw number 1. Merchants do receive benefits from payment card systems. They get increased sales and increased convenience. Increased merchant sales arise because when people use credit cards to make purchases and larger purchases, they bring in new types of purchases and you get increased sales because there's lower transactions costs. When I go and fill up my car with gas, they don't need as many employees because I pay myself. I put my card in to the machine. If everybody paid cash, you would have huge lineups. Also, the merchants don't have to hold cash balances, which generally are costly. The second flaw is there's no economic justification for cost-based regulation. You don't want to just look at cost. Cost is one factor, but it's not the only factor. It's a more complex system, and by limiting the justification of interchange fees only to cost, the argument fails to account for the respective benefits that merchants and cardholders derive from interchange fees. The third flaw is that retailers are not forced to accept credit cards as payment methods. They do so because there are benefits. It's less costly for them to use it when you measure all costs, and merchants can refuse to accept them. There's a large number that do. Costco, a huge merchant, doesn't accept MasterCard and doesn't accept Visa. And my wife and I both love Costco. 4, there's another flaw. There is no subsidization of credit card users by cash users. There's this argument that people who use cash are subsidizing credit card users. Yes, there is a no surcharge rule, but there's no rule prohibiting merchants from giving a discount for cash. There's no difference from an economic point of view from surcharging for credit cards or discounting for cash. Now, merchants do discount for cash, but it's very rare. A lot of times I would argue they do it actually to do discount for cash. They do it in order to avoid paying all sorts of taxes. Cash is a method to get around paying taxes. Flaw number 5, there's no rational economic basis to distinguish between 3- and 4-party systems. There's no difference to distinguish between the Amex system and Visa and MasterCard. Now, let me conclude by the lessons from Australia, and let me read you from a quote by a study by Robert Stillman and al. They concluded that regulation should only be employed if there's clear evidence of market failure and only if there's reason to believe that regulation is likely to benefit consumers. The RBA's regulations have clearly harmed consumers in Australia by causing higher cardholder fees and less valuable reward programs, and by reducing the incentives of issuers of four-party cards to invest and innovate. At the same time, there is no evidence that these losses to consumers have been offset by reduction in retail prices or improvements in the quality of retail service. So the empirical evidence does not support the view that consumers have derived any net benefits from the intervention. Generally, economists think of regulating an industry where there's some monopoly power and there's too little output produced and too high a prices charged. Regulation in Australia and regulating interchange fees causes a reduction in output and a higher price to consumers. Goes against what economists generally believe. The necessary conditions for regulation. Let me conclude. Before analyzing two-sided markets such as the payment system industry, it's critically important to understand the unique economic considerations that drive this efficiency and its competitiveness. Foremost among these is the interdependence of demand among the acquiring and issuing sides. One must consider the costs and benefits provided to both sides of the market rather than focusing on one aspect of the market in isolation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. Mr. Skolnick. I believe that Mr. Skolnick has a PowerPoint presentation which he is going to be setting up.
Thank you for having me. I'm a professor at the University of Alberta, and I should emphasize that I have no relationship with any of the various parties who have come before you in the last couple of weeks. My role, I think, this morning is to give you some sense of what economists talk about and when they think about this market. This is a very complicated market. It's very different from our standard textbook market, and so maybe economists can give you some help in deciding how to approach the problem that you have. I think the key point, as my colleague has mentioned, is the notion of a two-sided market. This dominates economic thinking, and this is the key concept I think that the committee should understand before deciding how to proceed. The idea of a two-sided market, just let me repeat, is the notion that you have a single platform, and this is the key word, platform, and what this platform does is it brings together many buyers and many sellers. So what does this mean? What I've done is I've tried to give you some examples, and there are countless examples of platforms and how the economics work. So the first example of a platform is precisely what you're discussing in these hearings. Visa and MasterCard provide a platform where they bring together lots of people on one side of the market who are the retailers and lots of people on the other side of the market who are the consumers. And by doing that, by bringing these two sides together, they create some value, and that's the value of their platform. But there are many other examples that I've shown you on this slide. For example, real estate listings. You have real estate boards have websites all over the country, and what these websites do is bring together house buyers and house sellers. But the platform in the middle is the real estate board, and that's the key economic actor that we care about. Another example is shopping malls. A shopping mall can be thought of economically as a platform. What does it do? The owner of the shopping mall brings together two sides. Side one are the store owners, side two are the shoppers. And so the shopping mall in itself doesn't do anything, doesn't sell anything, but it brings these parties together. Other examples, yellow pages, PDF files. A PDF file is a platform with readers and writers. And Google can be thought of as a platform. You have Google advertisers, Google searches. One point to emphasize in these platforms is how do you price these services? How does Google price or Yellow Pages price their services? What you find very commonly in all of these platforms is that one side is highly subsidized, in many cases for free, and the other side is it pays. So the examples that I've shown you on that slide, when you search on Google, it costs you nothing. But when you advertise on Google, when you're a seller, it costs you significant money. PDF readers, when you read a PDF document from Adobe, they give it to you for free. But if you want to write one of these things, it costs you a lot of money. Similar with Yellow Pages. One side, the readers get it for free, etc. So what you have is, this is a standard outcome in the economics literature, is that the pricing of these platforms, one side bears the costs, one side gets it for free. In fact, I would argue that in the credit card case, the consumers, that's my top line of that slide, not only do the consumers get it for free, but they actually get rewarded. They get more money when they use their credit card, and that, of course, is the notion of rewards, air miles and cashback, etc. And this fits in very much with standard economic thinking about how these two-sided markets should work. So what are the implications of these two-sided markets? The key point to emphasize, I believe, is the notion of winner-take-all, or what we call in economics jargon, network effects. What this means is that if you have a platform that everybody loves, if you have a platform that both the buyer side and the seller side use extensively, then you have a very valuable asset. As soon as and the second part of the winner-take-all story is, once you get big, you get even bigger. So the big get bigger. And so there are built-in economies of scale, the way economists describe this. So, and that, of course, is the situation that Visa and MasterCard find themselves in, and that is the situation that every platform owner wants to become. Another example would be Microsoft as a platform. It's so big, everybody uses this, nobody has a choice not to use them. The key objective of the platform owner, the people who own the platform, whether it's Microsoft or Google or Visa or MasterCard or Yellow Pages or whoever, the key objective is to get as much money as possible, like every business owner. But at the same time, they have to balance. They have to make sure that they have enough of the one side, the buy side, and enough of the other side, the sales side, to keep the thing going. As soon as you have a situation where either one of these parties leave the platform and go somewhere else, then the value of the platform gets less and eventually becomes zero. So they have to get as much money as they can, at the same time keeping everybody using them. So what you have, a situation, and this is standard economics in how we understand these two-sided markets, is that if you find yourself, like the retailers that you've heard in your committee, if you find yourself in a situation, like in the Visa or MasterCard case, where you have a very successful, very dominant platform, which is the Visa and MasterCard situation, then you're essentially stuck. You can't get out because all your customers demand that you use the platform, and there's nothing that you can really do to reduce your fees. So what do? Standard economics, or the literature on two-sided markets, says precisely what's happening at this meeting this morning. You lobby Parliament, you go to the courts, you go to the central banks, you go to the competition authorities. What the economics literature says to us is it's not possible for these guys to use standard economics mechanisms to escape the trap that they found themselves in. So, how do we get out of this? What is the threat to Visa or MasterCard, or any of these two-sided markets? I could be talking about Microsoft, I could be talking about Google. It's the same argument. The threat that they face is a new platform, a better platform, a platform that does things that makes more people happy, new technology. And so I've given you examples of PayPal, which is the slow emergence of a platform on the web that might one day, I don't know, might one day overcome Visa and MasterCard as a payments provider. And that's the threat. Once this new platform comes into being, then Visa and MasterCard face the problem. My final slide is, what are the implications of these two-sided markets? What do we expect? What do the economics literature tell us to expect? Firstly, I would say this fight that you've had before you for the last couple of weeks between Visa and MasterCard on the one side and the retailers on the other side, this is very predictable. This always happens. This identical fight has been happening around the world. My argument would be that this will continue. These meetings will certainly not be the last meetings that this House hears on this matter. Thirdly, even if there's a new dominant platform which overtakes Visa or MasterCard. This kind of conflict between the retailers on the one hand and the platform on the other hand will carry on. Similarly, even after regulation, for example, the Reserve Bank of Australia imposes some sort of regulation, this will not solve the problem. There is no nice, easy answer based on the economics literature as to how to fix this problem because of the nature of these two-sided markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skolnick. Mr. Lee. And I understand Mr. Lee has a handout as well. And c'est dans l'autre langue officielle aussi.
It's also available in the other official language.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the committee. As a former banker and a business school professor, I want to thank these two committees for inviting me. I clearly have a bias. I think you are the two most important committees in Parliament, Finance and Industry, because you're dealing with the most important issues of how do we create wealth in our economy. Just quickly, by way of background, I was in banking in the 1970s in the bank right across the street, the Bank of Montreal, which I now understand Parliament is now going to be using. It's a beautiful building. I hope you treat it well. I was a consumer loan manager, mortgage manager, commercial loan officer, and I have a PhD in public policy, and now I'm the MBA director in the Sprott School. I do want to mention that I've taught over 100 times in Middle East, Asia, and East Europe, including most of the former communist countries where I saw close and personal the impact of coercive government regulations in destroying the environment, the economy, and human rights. And finally, I don't consult or advise or invest in any firm or union or NGO, nonprofit, or government, or political party, and so I come here with complete transparency. I read all of the transcripts for the past, I guess, 2 months in both your committee and the Senate committee, and I really want to be somewhat provocative today and suggest that many of the witnesses, Retail Council, CFIB, suggested that the payment system today in Canada is very expensive and inefficient, and I think that this is really an urban myth. Just to put some reality into the conversation, from time immemorial until the 70s, even until the early 80s, banks opened at 10 in the morning and closed at 3. And if you couldn't get into the bank during that time, you didn't get your money. There were no debit cards, there was no internet banking, there was no phone banking, and credit cards only emerged in the mid-late 70s. There were two payment systems, cash and check. Both were expensive, slow, and dangerous. Why were they so? Because checks bounced regularly, every day. And this was a very large risk to retailers. Cash was stolen in holdups or by workers, although that risk wasn't so great, but it drove every business person to invest an enormous amount of money, or large amounts of money, to buying insurance, to bond the employees, the due diligence, safe, costly cash custody, and so forth. To endorse what Professor Carr said and Professor Schnollick said, the transaction costs are very expensive. But today, debit cards provide instant payment, no recourse, no bad checks, the same thing with credit cards. And so I'm arguing that the transaction costs are very cheap at 0.5% to 4%. This was borne out by a study by two think tanks very recently in D.C. The Conservative American Enterprise Institute and the very liberal Brookings Institute did a study of payment types, and not surprisingly, they found that cash was the most expensive form of payment. That's why when I heard some of the witnesses suggesting discounting for cash, if I was running a business, I would demand a premium for someone to pay cash, because cash is very expensive. Bankers understand that. There's large hidden costs with cash. You have to have complex, elaborate accounting systems. You have to have, for example, 2 people counting the cash if you don't want to get ripped off. And by contrast, credit cards stimulate big ticket purchases and stimulate impulse items. So I want to alert you to a study that was done only 8 months ago by the Bank of Canada in the city. They did a very large survey of businesses across Canada, and they found 3 findings in this survey of actual business people. They found that debit cards are preferred as least risky. I have no problem with that. Secondly, many businesses perceived that cash is the cheapest and most reliable. That is empirically false. And thirdly, the cards were seen as the most costly, least reliable, and for the same reason that 2 is, I argue, is wrong. 3 is wrong. What this demonstrates is that a lot of small businesses are financially illiterate, or at least partially illiterate, and this points to the need for more literacy programs. In fact, what happened over the past 10 years? What was their actual behavior? Well, on both the consumer side and the commercial side, the use of credit cards and debit cards went up. In terms of the merchant costs, and this is a study done by the Federal Reserve, I believe. I've got the sources in my laptop. We're at the midpoint across some 10, 15 countries in terms of the cost to the merchant for the use of cards. So what is the problem? I'm arguing that the problem is the misperception of the cost of cash versus credit by business, producing, as my colleagues have suggested, rent-seeking by trade associations coming to Parliament trying to get you to give them more profits instead of earning it the traditional way through competition. I also want to address, this is from the Federal Reserve showing the profitability of credit cards, and you simply note that it's cyclical. It's on the screen. It is cyclical based on two variables, the cost of money and, of course, the credit losses. And right now what we're experiencing in Canada, this is from the DBRS, the bond rating agency. Credit losses are soaring in Canada. As you can see, the red line, which is the weighted average, is pushing up to 6% of all credit card balances are going to be charged off to bad debt in 2009. That is a horrific charge-off. When I was mortgage manager, I had a 0 charge-off, and personal loans we had between 1/4 of 1 to 1/2 of 1. They're up to 6, which is just off the charts. Again, you can see this on the next one, the delinquency and loan losses, Canada, and you can see that they're up 35% for delinquency, and the loan loss rate on credit cards is up 44%. I won't belabor the Australian solution. We already know it. You know it from the people that have testified, but I do have a couple of graphs you want to look at. These are from the Federal Reserve that did a study. I believe Professor Carr quoted that study. After I think it was 4 years, there was no change in the relative share of credit card use or debit card use. However, what did happen, merchant fees went down, and the banks recouped a very large amount through increased card fees. You can see the two lines, the green line going up are the card fees charged on standard credit cards, and the red line going up is on the premium credit cards. So what the Australians did was they simply shifted the burden from the merchants to the consumers. So what the Retail Council and the CFIB are asking you to do is they said, don't stick it to us, they want you to stick it to the consumer, which is me. The bank issuers, as this slide shows, recovered 30 to 40% or $500 million from consumers. The irony is that the merchant costs fell on a transaction basis. When you run through the numbers, they dropped about 4 cents on a $40 purchase, which is really quite trivial. So there were no dramatic changes. I won't summarize because Professor Carr already dealt with this. The same Federal Reserve economist that Professor Carr spoke about reported that the central bank, the Reserve Bank of Australia regulations failed to achieve its policy goals. So what are the alternatives? And I'll just wrap up. I make 3 assumptions, that you, the legislators, face a choice of governing instruments from the least coercive, such as required information disclosure, to the most coercive, such as government ownership or the price controls advocated by the Retail Council or the CFIB. My second assumption is you should only select coercive instruments when all else has failed, when there's clear evidence of market failure, and there is no evidence of market failure in the card systems. So my recommended policy solutions are much more rigorous information disclosure concerning rates, fees, benefits, costs, interest charges. Secondly, enhanced regulatory oversight to address deceitful or anti-competitive practices. And thirdly, financial literacy in the schools and the education system. And I mention that because some witnesses expressed deep skepticism about literacy programs, but we do in Canada spend billions on primary school education, secondary and post-secondary, so it would be a bit disingenuous for a professor to advocate against literacy programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just clarify something? I had prepared some of my remarks on debit cards, and I don't know, my understanding, perhaps incorrect, was that was going to be part of the discussion?
It is. That's
okay.
Correct. The study is on both the credit card and debit card systems.
Thank you. Then I'll include those.
Thank you.
So I'm a professor of economics at Queen's University, and I have had an interest in payments cards for quite a long time now, certainly dating back to when I was involved in the Interac hearing in the mid-90s, which led to the creation of the current debit card system in Canada. But I'm going to begin by talking about interchange fees, as my 3 colleagues have. But I don't think you need to hear anything more about two-sided markets. Interchange fees, though, are set to balance the incentives of merchants to accept the card with the incentives of the issuer to issue it and the cardholder to use it. The interchange fee, in effect, is paid from the merchant, strictly speaking, it's paid from the acquirer, to the card issuer, and is not a conventional price. And I think this is a point, although my colleagues have been over this ground a little bit, but you know, we think of high interchange fees as hurting merchants because it's a price. High prices hurt the people that have to pay them. But of course, being a two-sided price, it's really not that simple. As I said, the interchange fee is designed to balance these networks who have a joint interest in maximizing the acceptance by merchants, and of course, merchants have an interest in large numbers of cards being available, as do cardholders, so that when they go to buy a shirt, they can find a merchant who will accept their card. There are some theoretical conditions under which the interchange fee is completely neutral, in fact. Changes in the fee are balanced by changes in surcharges and card fees so that all parties are indifferent as to the actual level of the fee. Now, most academic economists who've studied this don't believe that we necessarily have that theoretical situation. The problem is, though, in my opinion, we do not know enough yet about how the state of competition in acquiring and issuing really interact to determine what that interchange fee is in the absence of regulation. In other words, from an economic welfare point of view. You've heard quite a bit, both from my colleagues here and I think earlier, about the Australian experiment. And as we know, and we just saw some data on that, it's certainly one thing we do know about that is that the reduction in interchange fees through regulation in Australia did lead to an increase in card fees, and it did lead to a reduction in value of rewards to cardholders. Now, there is a subtle and important question that Jack Carr hinted at, and that is, do the various prices and fees in these payment networks, do they distort the pattern of payments? That is, if we think about credit cards, debit cards, and cash, and we've, again, my colleagues have talked about this, is there a tendency for, let's say, a higher percentage of payments being made via credit cards relative to some kind of social optimum? It's an interesting question, and there are some academic discussions of this, but again, my view of the conclusion is we just don't know the answer yet. And I would agree with my colleagues very much that in a case where we don't know the answer, it's too soon to rush into regulation. That regulation is desirable when we have a clearly identified market failure, and we understand which direction our intervention is going to improve things. There is an important question in which Canada is a little different than other countries, and that is the question of whether the credit card networks is acting solely as a joint venture of the member banks, or whether it's acting as an independent corporation in its own right in order to pursue its own profits. Now, in Canada, as you know, the credit card networks have recently restructured themselves in order to be the latter, partly as a result of prompting from the Competition Bureau, who wanted that change in order to approve the duality, a change to allowing banks to offer both card networks, or to issue cards from both MasterCard and Visa. One of the questions, again, and in the academic studies, one of the things that's likely to influence interchange fees is whether or not there's more imperfect competition at the issuing end or more imperfect competition at the acquiring end. There have been some studies that suggested that it's likely to be more at the issuing end. And the reason for that is the idea of switching costs, that consumers, of course, who hold those cards, it can be difficult to change one card to another card because first of all, you've got a balance on it, quite likely, and secondly, you have a bunch of card numbers in your online shopping networks. If you're me, you do anyway. And so the consumers do face some switching costs. But again, I would say we do not know the answer to this. We don't know. And this is an interesting academic question, but we don't know the answer from a policy point of view. Now, another question. Again, my colleagues touched on this, but no surcharging rules. Now, there are some international differences here that are interesting. For example, in the UK, where these issues have been studied quite a lot, the no surcharging rule, was abolished in the early 90s. And yet, there's been very little surcharging. And as my colleague here pointed out, there's also very little cash discounting as well. However, in Australia, at least my understanding is that since they abolished their no surcharging rule, which was just about 5 years ago, I think 2003, there's actually been quite a lot of surcharging. and the number I saw is that 23% of transactions, credit card transactions through what are called large retailers, are now surcharged if you use a credit card, which is a pretty big number. And I just throw that out there to say that this is something that is interesting and possibly important, and we don't know a lot about it. In conclusion, on credit cards, just to restate what I said earlier, is I think it's much too early for us to have a definitive conclusion about any form of regulatory intervention in this market. I don't think we understand it well enough. We have the Australian example, and it's not at all clear that was a success. It's possible that there will be some intervention in the UK soon, and we may learn something from that. Now, just a few remarks on debit cards, if I may. We've had this unusual situation in Canada where we've had a single debit card network now for more than 10 years, the Interact network, and it's been regulated, so it's a not-for-profit organization. So the question is, which system is preferable, a regulated natural monopoly, or if it is a natural monopoly, or a competitive system in which merchants and consumers choose the debit network that they want to use for each transaction? So ideally, a merchant could choose to subscribe to one or more debit card networks, and a buyer may have the choice for any given transaction to route it through Network A, which, let's say, might be Interac, or Network B, which might be the new Visa debit network, which is going to be rolled out, I believe, sometime in the near future. Now, of course, natural monopolies have the property that, because of network economies and scale economies, that a single supplier is the most cost-effective organization within which to supply the market. However, this conclusion is essentially a static one and ignores all the dynamic economies and incentives for innovation that come from a competitive system in which networks compete. The policy concerns with debit cards mostly have to do with merchant fees and to some extent with interchange fees. Now, interchange fees in the debit network, the Interact debit network, are currently set at 0. The concern that I've heard is that when Visa debit enters, and possibly MasterCard debit as well, that that the cost to the merchant will go up. And one of the ways this has been expressed is through this concern that the current fee to a merchant for using an Interact debit card is about 12 cents. It's a flat per unit fee. And that when Visa debit comes in, I believe that they're going to be using more complicated fee structure, which is partly value-based. So partly it's a percentage of the value of the transaction. I'm just finishing up. My view of this is that competition is good. We really, you know, we've got to start from where we are. Where we are is we have a monopoly. We can hardly, you know, we should not be throwing up our hands and expressing alarm that we're going to get entry here. Entry is a good thing. Entry is going to create competition. It's most likely that entry will create benefits for consumers because that's what entry does. And the idea that has been, the concern that has been expressed that somehow Visa debit will become a dominant firm in this in the debit market seems to me to be very premature because at the moment, of course, it's Interact that is the dominant firm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Thank you to all our 4 witnesses for their opening comments. We're now going to go to comments and questions from members of this committee for the next hour and a half. Nous utilisons les 2 langues officielles, donc il y a...
You use both official languages here, so there will be members who will be asking you questions in French as well as in English.
There is earpieces provided, and the channels are listed on your desk. We'll begin with Mr. McCallum.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all 4 economists for being with us today. Jack Carr began by saying that professors talk in 50-minute sound bites. I used to, but now I have 7 minutes maximum, including your answers to questions. So I shall try to be succinct. First question, the two-sided market idea is appealing, but I wonder in the case of credit markets, given that banks are such key players as issuers, whether that's not a little oversimplified and that in some way there must be 3 sides, perhaps to Professor Skolnick?
That's absolutely true. And in fact, in the economic literature, they talk about many-sided markets. It doesn't have to be 2. 2 is just a simplification. So clearly you would have, in this situation, multiple sides. But as a simplification, I would suggest that the way I think of this game is between buyers and sellers. And I would put together the banks and Visa and MasterCard on the same side as part of the platform. That's the key part. These are they're the middle people to try and bring together lots of buyers, which is consumers, and lots of sellers, which is retailers. So the way I envisage the issue before you is to think about retailers, which are the sellers, and consumers, who are the buyers, and the platform. For me, that's the key word when I'm trying to think about this issue, is how does the platform work? Whether there's multiple parties within the platform, I think that's in this case quite obvious. So it's quite possible to have multiple-sided markets.
Okay, thank you. One of my colleagues suggested at some earlier meeting that you know, we all want more competition. There are only 2 major card companies, Visa and MasterCard, and there's at least 6 banks or more. So would it make sense, or would it be technically feasible for the interchange rates to be sent by the banks rather than by the credit card companies? That would seem to lead to potentially more competition, but possibly it wouldn't work, which is why I'm asking the question. Maybe we'll try Professor Ware on that one.
Well, as I said earlier, there is this key question. First of all, is whether the credit card network is structured as a joint venture of the banks, or whether it's an independent corporation. And if the general view is, so let's assume first of all that it's the latter, which is true in Canada at the moment. Then, in a sense, it is the network, the credit card network, that is representing the interests of the network. The banks, of course, are acting in their own interest. The banks have the interests of one side of that network, the issuing side, if you like, but not. It's the network that is interested in balancing the acceptance by merchants with the the issuing of cards and the use of cards by cardholders. So I would say giving the banks, it's not quite clear to me as a regulatory initiative exactly how one would do that, but giving the banks the right to set the interchange fee is actually sort of biasing the network in the direction of one side of it.
Okay, does anybody Do any of the other three disagree with that view? If not, I'll go on to another question. Okay. This one also for Professor Ware on the subject of Interact. My impression is that Interact has served Canadians well at low cost for a good number of years, and that I'm not opposed to new competition from MasterCard or Visa necessarily, but a lot of people think international experience suggests that once they get in there, they will tend to raise rates higher, and consumers or merchants will end up paying more than they do at the present time. And that one of the problems is that Interact has been structured in a way where its governance model is not appropriate to deal with the new competition, and where Interact, in a sense, is like the David, in my view, fighting these two new Goliaths, and that maybe there's a role for government or Parliament to try to improve the situation for Interact so that it can better compete with these two new major global forces. Would you agree with that?
Yes, actually, I do agree with that. I think that
first one I've hit.
No, I mean, just to go back to your the beginning of your question, absolutely, Interact has been a huge success, and as you know, I'm sure Canada has one of the, I think we're the second biggest debit card users in the world, after I think Norway. And so it's been a huge success, yes. And part of that is because of the standardization, the simplicity, the openness that was created by the consent order from the Competition Tribunal in 1995 that allowed anyone to connect, basically. So that's the first point, yes. Second point is the structure, the governance structure of Interact serving it well now? No, the answer is no, it's not, because it needs to be able, if it's going to compete, and I certainly would support competition, we want competition. If it's going to compete, it needs to be flexible, it needs to be able to innovate, it needs to be able to basically make profits.
Okay, does anybody disagree or want to add anything to that comment? Yeah.
It pains me,
if you don't mind.
Briefly, it pains me because you were a very distinguished economist at McGill, and I'm very respectful of your position, but I have to disagree. I hope and I don't believe it is the role of Parliament or the legislators to pick winners and losers. And by what, if I understood you, you were suggesting creating some mechanism or policy that would give a bias towards Interact so that they could beat or defeat MasterCard or Visa. And if that is the argument, I hope that you don't, because it's not the ownership of the company, but the value and benefits that they bring to consumers that should be the driver in the policy. On the second issue, I agree. The Interact governance structure is archaic and inefficient and should be changed.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Carr, just briefly.
Yes, just briefly. I can't see how competition could hurt. Whether you want to loosen regulation on Interact is something else. I hear merchants saying if Interact comes in, they're going to charge a higher price and going to take over the system. That's inconsistent. It's hard to believe a competitor coming in charging a higher price and taking over the system. It's competitors which are more efficient and charge lower prices which can take over the system. You can't have it both ways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. Monsieur Laforêt.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to all of our witnesses. I will ask a very direct question to start. Do you agree? Are you in favor of a more tighter regulation of the platforms as was described by Professor Schlonek as in terms of the platforms used for credit cards and debit cards? You can each answer.
The question was tighter regulation, and I think my views are similar to the fellow economists, is that when thinking about regulation, be very, very careful. It seems to me that there's a hierarchy of different things when you're thinking of regulations to resolve this issue that government as a whole could do. I think everybody's in agreement about issues like transparency. Everybody's in agreement about issues like financial literacy. That's not a debate.
Je vais vous amener sur un autre.
I'll bring up a similar point. Last week we learned that within the regulatory system, there isn't any definition of electronic money in Canada nor in Quebec. it is a major point because we're talking about a framework, a regulatory or a framework of to use cards, and the government does not have any legal definition of electronic money. Do you think that's a major issue that has to be addressed and resolved, and that would at least allow us to better define the terms that we're talking about? I'm asking the question to all of our witnesses.
If I could respond, yes, there is a role for legislators to create the rules of the game that govern all of the institutions in the game. And the metaphor I use all the time is that you are the referees in the hockey game. But we do not want the referees, if we can imagine a hockey game between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators, we don't want the referees to jump on the side of the Toronto Maple Leafs, even though they need a lot of help because they're a bad team. We don't want them to bias the game in their favor. We want them to be independent and neutral and nonpartisan in creating a neutral platform and not favoring one player over another.
Can I also answer? On regulation. There is regulation. There's plenty of regulation in the Canadian Payments Association and whatnot. The question, I think, before this committee and what the retailers want is regulation of the interchange fees, and that the question is why? What's the problem? As far as I see, interchange fees have been stable in Canada for a long period of time. There's a strong economic rationale why you need interchange fees. My colleagues have shown a large number of examples of cases in two-sided markets, and therefore I think there's an economic reason for it. There's no economic reason to regulate interchange fees.
Il y a pas personne, il n'y a aucun d'entre vous.
None of you are saying, or none of you are delivering information relative to your studies, your research. Nobody talked about the effects of loyalty programs and premium cards. The consumer is the winner in all of this. He's the one who's gains. But there is an intention behind these loyalty programs, and nobody talked about the effects of the loyalty programs. And I believe it was Mr. Sholnick who was the only one who talked about, well, at least what I understood as platforms, and you compared the Visa platform and the real estate listings platform. But I think they're rather different one from the other. The profit margins are entirely different. In the real estate market, there are commissions as high as 10%. And among merchants, there are categories of merchants who have very slim profit margins, and those people are the ones who bear the full brunt when there are changes to the interchange fee. If you were to put them all in one same basket, well, I would think that it's rather unfair to compare them.
Excellent question, and I think when you're thinking about platforms, platforms are very different. Some platforms can be competitive with other platforms, and the example would be shopping malls. When you have one mall and another mall in the next suburb, if the shopping mall owner makes the retailers unhappy, they'll move to the next suburb, to the other shopping mall. It's still a platform. However, the Visa and MasterCard platform, the interesting issue with the Visa and MasterCard platform is right now they are dominant. They have an extremely high market share, and everybody has to use them. And so you're absolutely right that different platforms have different levels of success. But I think when you're thinking about platforms, the issue is there's always around the corner, possibly, maybe, another platform that can come in and compete against them. We don't know, but I think maybe that through technological change, through the internet, through organizations like PayPal or other kinds of systems, they will possibly reduce.
One last question. None of you analyzed. Well, you compared systems, but nobody really analyzed what would happen if nothing were to be done. Both issuers and acquirers have a lot of money, and retailers have been complaining that their profits have declined and that they are having trouble surviving with the increased charges. But you said that the sales are increasing, the volume is getting higher, and everybody's a winner. But what would happen if there were absolutely no regulations? What would happen if we just took a totally laissez-faire approach, a hands-off approach? Was there any study that we could get our hands on to get an idea of what the forecast would be? Because there's a perception that things are overexploited.
Fair approach, and a number of countries do, in fact, have a laissez-faire approach. And as far as I can see, the system is working. The interchange fee, which has been complained about by the retailers, certainly changed in complexity in April 2008. But if you look at a weighted average of interchange fees before and after, I understand there's almost been no change. It was 1.58% on average before and 1.6% on average now. Like with all averages, some retailers are worse off and some retailers are better off. Let me get back to your thing on loyalty programs. You said nobody asked or answered a question on loyalty programs. Loyalty programs exist in a number of industries, and they're a marketing method by which banks, issuers get customers, and they seem to work. That's why they use them. We as economists really have no expertise in designing loyalty programs or designing marketing programs, but we know firms out there will design programs that bring in customers, and they appear to work, and there doesn't appear anything wrong. What some merchants don't appreciate, is that these programs sign up more customers and bring in those customers to their store.
Thank you.
We've already heard that. Thank you, Mr. Carr. Thank you, Mr. Laforêt. Mr. Bernier is the next member to ask a question. Thank you, Chair. Well, listen, I want to tell you that your presentations, each one of your presentations, were extremely enriching. I agree with you. The system is working well. The capitalist system runs smoothly. Individual freedom works. And there isn't a problem. I don't know why we've been here for weeks on end because you're telling us that there isn't a problem. The fact is that there are companies that are gaining profits, and that's how wealth and that's how jobs are created. And when politicians want to start regulating, and when they do start regulating, each act or each regulation confers a privilege to a specific group. And so some groups get preferential treatment. The governments can pick and choose. But I do have a question of economic nature, given the fact that the system is working well right now. And so are there any barriers, any obstacles to entering this industry? I'm referring specifically to the fees for the platforms that are currently being used. Now, if a competitor sought to enter the fray, could he do it freely, or could government actually create a barrier to entering that market? Tying into what Mr. Laforêt was saying, what are we going to do in the future? What could be done? I think we have to make sure that there's absolutely no barriers to allow future competitors to enter the market. Therefore, I'd like to hear your point of view on that.
Clayton Christensen is a professor at the Harvard Business School who has written on innovation very extensively as the most important form of competitive advantage in a business. And that's the way that I teach strategic management, where we deal with these questions of how do you create value in a business, how do you attract customers, as Professor Carr was saying. And so you use innovation, and it could be innovation in loyalty programs or pricing or in services around the product and so forth. There's a myriad of ways to differentiate the product, to create value, to attract the consumer, and deliver a competitive advantage. Christensen has noted over and over that often when innovation comes, and disruptive innovation or radical innovation, it comes from a player outside of the industry who changes the rules of the game and comes up with a brand new technology that has similar functionality. And so I'm agreeing with your comment that when government enters, or the legislators, put barriers, impose artificial barriers, you are going to inhibit the innovativeness of our economy. And it is CATA, the Canadian Advanced Technology Association, that points out that we are lagging most of the other Western worlds in terms of our innovativeness, and some faculty, some professors believe that it's due to excessive government intervention that regulates the innovative capacities of our businesses.
Thank you. I think
I'd like to answer your question.
Mr. Carr. Mr. Carr?
I think the system is...
We're going to go to Mr. Carr and then Mr. Ware.
Okay, sorry. I think the system is working well, and you do want to allow as much competition as possible. You also have to realize that there is economies of scale, and so within any platform, you're not going to have a large number of players, but within that system, we do have within, say, the Visa or MasterCard system, you have competition between acquirers, and you have competition between issuers. So there is that competition, and you want to encourage as much of it. You have competition between payment systems, too, which has to be stressed. The payment system, which used to be used 40 years ago, was cash and checks. There was sort of a natural monopoly in that, and that's disappeared. And it's Visa and MasterCard has grown dramatically, not because of artificial rules they have, but because they've provided a better mousetrap. They've provided a better product. And so they took over from both cash and check, and now you have debit and credit cards. The point you mention is that what Parliament has to worry about is you always have groups coming to you seeking regulation. Adam Smith back in 1776, and John McCallum would appreciate this, said you have to worry about merchants and workers coming to you asking for legislation in their favor, which, like tariffs or regulation, which would benefit them. And I think that's what you classically see here. Economists call it rent-seeking. You have a system which is working, but merchants see an opportunity to, and retailers to gain against the system and to improve even better. Now, I feel bad for the retailers because currently the economy is doing badly, and retailers, along with everybody else, are hurting. But the economy will pick up. They'll be better off, but you don't want to regulate a system and be left with rules which cause an inefficient means of payment. You'll be stuck with that forever, and the price you pay for giving gifts from one group to the other is an inefficient system that's costly to the economy, that reduces the per capita GDP for Canada, and that clearly can't help. Systems which result, laws which result in inefficient systems are bad laws.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carr. Mr. Ware.
Just very quickly, so in the debit area, what government needs to do is to reduce the barriers to entry and encourage entry, as I said earlier. And I think, you know, if they achieve that, then we will get more competition and consumers will benefit. In the credit area, just to sort of follow on from one thing that Jack Carr said is yes, 40 years ago we had checks and cash, and then credit cards had a huge successful run. Although we're not likely to get a new network, a credit card network entering, because of the network economies are just too large. But one thing, for example, I would predict, and we never can really predict innovations, is that we will start to see a lot of online debit transactions in the future, because one of the things that, for example, the Interac card has not been able to be used for online transactions, because I think it's a security issue. That's going to change, I expect, and that may in fact reduce credit card use. But as Jack said, that's innovation and that's efficiency, and that's what we want to encourage and allow.
Yes, thank you,
Larry. Yeah.
Monsieur Bernier.
Just 2 minutes, Mr.
If I could just comment, following up on Professor Ware's comments about innovation on the internet, I think one of the more important recent developments technologically is the emergence of this organization called PayPal, which this committee might or might not be aware of. And what this is, it flowed from eBay, where individual buyers are selling to individual sellers. There's no merchants, there's no big organizations. These are private individuals selling to each other. And you couldn't set up a credit card arrangement between these two individuals because you're a private person. You can't set up a credit card account that people can pay you. So what PayPal did they set up a system which is beginning to take off and potentially could become very big and very important as eBay grows, which is in direct competition to Visa and MasterCard in this niche of payment on eBay over the internet. It's a new platform. And so I think we'll have more and more of these new platforms competing with Visa and MasterCard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skolnick. We now go to Mr. Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I hope your watch, well, I wonder if your watch is a painting of Salvador Dali because it's distorting your perception of time. Obviously, you've given more time to Mr. Bernier.
Discretion of the chair, as per the standing or the routine motions in both committees. So I can assure you that time has been fairly allocated.
I know that your discretion also includes allowing enough time for the opposition. Mr. Carr, Mr. Skolnick, Mr. Lee, Mr. War, good morning and welcome to this committee. I want to start with you, Mr. Carr, because you seem to be skirting the entire issue of loyalty programs. What is generally known as loyalty programs, you're saying that you're an economist, that you don't look into that issue. But I want you to be able to make a very clear and transparent explanation. You clearly stated that your work was sponsored by Visa, because I don't think that can be skirted so easily, given the fact that your research has been funded by Visa. Take, for example, two women who are leaving the supermarket, and one says to the other, I used my card with a certain bank, and I've just received a $2 cashback on a $100 purchase. Everybody knows that commercial, and the other one says, well, how much did you get? Nothing, because that person used cash. So who paid the $2 back to that woman if it is not all consumers, including those who use cash when they pay their grocery bills? Who is paying that $2 cash back when a person decides to use the credit card?
First of all, you implied that my research is financed by Visa. I announced that. It's certainly the case. But like loyalty programs, professors have brand names. And I say what I believe. And if the message is consistent and Visa wants to subsidize it, that's clear. But I believe in 100% transparency. And I told you that. Second, on loyalty programs, what I said was that I, as an economist, wouldn't know how to design a loyalty program. But I know that they exist in many different industries, and they're there. Now, your key question was who pays? Now, the interesting thing is you assume, clearly, when people look at costs of credit cards, and one of the reasons why credit cards are more costly is it costs something to bring those customers in. And the way you bring the customers in is you give them these points in loyalty programs. But the other part of the equation, when you look at the system, is the efficiency gained by bringing them in. When I go and I take my card and I get 2% cash back at the pumps, what I find is that I can do that transaction and for the merchant much cheaper. I don't have to line up and pay cash. The merchant doesn't have to add cash. So it's more efficient. The second thing is I recently bought an Air Canada ticket with my credit card for a year from now. Now, without the credit card, I wouldn't have done it. Now, why? Even I wouldn't pay cash because I'm worried that Air Canada won't be here a year from now. Okay, they may be bankrupt. But with my credit card and with that premium credit card, what they give me is they give me insurance. They give me insurance that if Air Canada goes under and they can't default.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Carr, but that wasn't the question.
No, but that's the
Hold on,
benefit.
Mr. Carr. The affirmation was made that it's an urban legend that people who are paying cash are somehow subsidizing people who are paying with credit cards.
That's correct.
In the advertisement, two ladies walking out with their cart, one of them says, I just got $2 for my $100 purchase off my card. My question to you is, who's giving her the $2?
Yes. You're assuming, though, that it's just as efficient to use cash. Yes, there's the $2 paid for that $100
Still not
transaction.
answering the question.
Yeah,
Okay.
wait, I'm trying to answer your question.
You're not answering it, so we're going to go somewhere else. No, don't. You're not a victim, Mr. Carr, but we will go somewhere else. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, I have a question for you, and it does have to do with the economics, but also has to do with the public policy. I'm working in a business, and I'm buying a $40,000 piece of equipment. It's my business. The person I'm buying from says, we have a bonus this month. We're giving you back 2% cash. I take the 800 bucks. If I don't declare it, I've just committed an offense under the Income Tax Act, because if I'm trying to deduct the whole 40 grand. If I'm the employee of somebody's business and they say, we've got a special this month, we can deliver a flat screen TV worth 800 bucks. We can deliver it to your cottage if you're buying this particular piece of equipment. If I do that, I've committed a fraud on my employer. We've just described how much fun it is to get bonuses, to get to 2%, why not 4%? How do you deal with that in terms of public policy when you've got a lot of people? I have a friend who's in the medical, he's a medical professional. Last year he took a $25,000 trip, all on points. Hotels, everything, because everything that he buys in his medical practice, a lot of equipment, he puts on a credit card. And last year that amounted to about 25,000 bucks, so for a couple of $1 million of purchases. Where's that money accounted for? And is it taxed? Or is this just an entry-level kickback scheme that society's decided that they're going to accept?
Actually, I would take the opposite tact. It is a reduction, a discount on the purchase. And people that buy big-ticket items know this, that when they go into the car dealership, they can negotiate a deal better than some other customers.
But if somebody is declaring the $40,000 expenditure and they've in fact gotten 800 bucks back in points to buy another trip and it's not declared, why is that less of an offense under the Income Tax Act than the person who gets 800 bucks cash? Why is one morally, ethically, or legally different from the other? I put it to you that it's not.
I'm not dealing with the Income Tax Act. I'm not a tax accountant nor a tax lawyer. I'm dealing with the strategy, the strategic decision by companies.
But isn't it part of the consideration we have to have? Mr. Carr wants to duck the issue, saying these programs, these loyalty programs, that has nothing to do with me. I'm an economist.
I don't want to duck the issue. I want to confront it head on.
Okay.
I just don't want to deal with the tax issue.
Well, what's the difference between getting 800 bucks cash back and not declaring it to the Income Tax Department, and getting 800 bucks cash in the form of trips and so on and not declaring it? Is there any fundamental difference?
Well, first off, when you're buying something, you're buying it out of after-tax income. So if I buy an airplane ticket, and then if you, as Parliament, wanted to tax me on the benefit, on the savings, you're taxing me twice, because I've already bought the ticket.
I don't think that holds. I don't think that works, Mr. Lee. In the example, I've got 800 bucks cash as a kickback for the purchase of a $40,000 piece of equipment. We all agree if the person takes the $40,000, applies that as a business expense, they've just committed an offense under the Income Tax Act. I'm buying the same $40,000 piece of equipment, putting it on a credit card, getting 800 bucks back in the form of, there's one bank that even lets you buy RRSPs with the 2% back on their credit card. And then you're getting a further tax decrease on that.
Thank you.
And that's all money lost from the economy. How is that possible to discuss this whole issue without looking at the effect of those on the bottom line of the government and lost taxes?
Thank you, Mr. Mulcair. Thank you. We're out of time on this round. Perhaps you could answer the...
I'll respond to it very quickly. Yeah. There are loyalty programs throughout the economy. At Carleton University, we have coffee shops around and they give it a card saying, you punch it every time you buy a coffee, the 10th coffee is free. It's the same concept as getting a discount on your credit card. It's called discount for volume. If you patronize that business more than another business, I'm giving you an incentive to come back to my business over and over and over. And that's the value creation. That's the growth to my business as a business manager.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Rhoda, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a couple of comments made, or one in particular, that I found a little bit disturbing, but it had to do with still work. The system as we have it is still working. There's not a problem yet. As parliamentarians, we have to look at the better of all society, and I just want you to realize that just because it's working now doesn't mean it's not going to work down the road. And if we see something coming up, I think that's where we want to look at it to prevent any possible problems for the betterment, a better good of everyone. But the system as it stands right now is you have the providers who are the card issuers, you have the banks and the consumers who are basically the customers of the providers. And under a competitive system in a card where you have two major cards, the providers are vying for the business of the banks, and they're vying for the banks of the consumers so that they can take their cards. Now, the one thing I find very disturbing is that when they're vying for that business, they offer more benefits. They offer to differentiate themselves. And how do they do that? I think Mr. Mulcair asked the question, who pays for it, at the expense of the merchant. And I know the argument will be, well, the merchant is selling his receivables or her receivables, and that's the cost they pay. And usually when you have a cost, usually you negotiate something and it's fixed. You mentioned Adam Smith earlier on, and I believe in the economy that Adam Smith dealt with, it was much simpler. You had pretty well the same, I think you had to have the same product. It's been a few years since I've studied Adam Smith, but basically the economy has to be pretty well level, where you have similar products and relatively barrier-free entry into the market. In a system like what we have with the banks, where you have basically two major players, and you have the merchants who are basically the pawns in all this, and the costs are passed on to the merchants who basically have to have this service, do you not find there's something wrong with the system?
There's a number of points you made, and let's hope I get all of them. One, let me get the Adam Smith point. The Adam Smith point I made about people lobbying government, and that occurs all over the world, and it occurred since 1776, and it occurs today. People act in their own best interest. That was Adam Smith's point, and if you have government setting rules and regulations, they'll try to get the rules set in their own interest. That hasn't changed. The nature of the economy is much more complicated, but that fundamental fact is still the same. Now, on these systems, I think it's important to stress when one has to understand how it is and who bears the cost. What happened 40, 50 years ago? Only cash and checks were used, and then credit cards came along. Now, credit cards could only survive if they innovated, if they were more efficient. And the example I gave is, you know, if I go to Tim Hortons and I swipe my credit card, it's faster. If I go to service station, it's faster. It's more efficient. They need less employees to take cash if I do it myself. I can make online transactions. So when you have innovation and it's efficient, the new system could offer the product more benefits at a lower cost. So you say, who pays for the benefits? No one. They result from building the better mousetrap. If you built a better mousetrap, you could sell it cheaper and give a better product. This selling it cheaper, as Professor Lee said, you give the loyalty programs, you give all these things, you give all these benefits. The customer is getting it cheaper because it's a superior product, not in all transactions, in a lot of transactions. And that's how credit cards could survive. They provide a better product at a lower price. And the merchants only see these benefits being given to the customers. They don't see that these transactions are being done more efficiently and these customers are now being brought in. That's the gain.
Mr. Lee, did you want to add?
Can I go to Mr. Lee? I've got a question for Mr. Lee, and it'll probably lead right into this. Ed, if you don't mind, Professor Lee.
Just briefly, so Mr.
Be
Rhoda
very
can
quick.
move
You
on.
said one thing that caught my attention. You said the merchants are pawns, implying they have no choice. I will test your theory. Any merchant, are they forced to take credit or debit? No, they can take cash or check, but they choose not to because they know deep down cash and check is far more expensive than debit or credit. That's why they're taking it.
Which leads me to my question here. I mean, you mentioned again that cash and check are more expensive, or you mentioned debit and credit was cheaper. What I've got here is a study done, a discussion paper by the Bank of Canada, and it looks at a transaction that is about $36.50, which is about an average, and it shows that the average cash transaction is 25 cents, debit comes in at 19 cents, and credit is at 82. It's more than 3 times the next level. So what you're arguing basically is saying, well, credit is much cheaper. And that's where I fear with the debit, if it goes to a percentage basis, all of a sudden you're just changing money from one place to another, yet you're charging a percentage. And that can get quite substantial. And in fact, over here, it's more than 3 times as much. Now, the argument is, well, with the better card, with the incentive cards, people will spend more money. And, you know, there is an argument for that. And I don't agree with your assertion that the use of card payments can stimulate impulse, especially on larger purchases. However, that doesn't apply to certain categories that retailers like grocers or gas retailers who must contend with very small margins as it is. And what we've effectively done is we've taken a fixed level of consumption. And I don't think it's really fair to those consumers that they should have to pay a higher rate on an interchange rate that offers all these benefits. They've got very thin margins. They don't have a choice whether they choose to accept the base model or the Cadillac model. For lack of a better word.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rhoda. Briefly, Mr. Lee, before we move on to Mr. Decker.
I have looked at several studies, including the Bank of Canada study, and I've looked at it with a couple of chartered accountants from the school. I believe that every study that's been done on the cost of payments has radically underestimated the cost of cash because they have not factored in the cash custody required, safes, 2 people counting the cash, and so on. I think the cost of cash, although I can't give you a number, is probably double or triple or quintuple because there has not been a full cost-benefit analysis of using the kind of techniques that the PBO has used, using full cost accounting. So that's my response.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Mr. Rhoda. Mr. Decker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On a point of information, Mr. Chair, I think if Mr. Mulcair were to actually read the Income Tax Act, he would find that the use of a credit card reward point of any kind on rewards earned on a corporate transaction is actually a declarable taxable benefit. And that's been in the Income Tax Act for many years, I believe. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your presentations. Have any of you studied the interest rates charged by credit card companies and the relationship between the rather high rates of, say, 19 to 20% that is often charged on these credit cards to the prime interest rate? And what, in your view, is the average effective interest rate earned by the banks and the credit card companies on these rates?
I have looked at it. In fact, DBRS has a beautiful study that came out only 3 months ago. The yield, remember, 70% of all cardholders pay off their credit card in full within the 30-day interest-free period. So they're not getting 19%. Their effective yield, gross, is 13%. Then you deduct cost of funds and you deduct the charge-off rate. And by my calculation, of course, it varies over time in terms of the cost of funds and the cost of charge-offs. Right now, cost of funds is low, charge-offs is skyrocketing. But the net is somewhere around 5% when you take off the cost of funds, cost of charge-offs, cost of running the business. And this is what people are missing. They look at that big number of 19% and they say, oh my goodness. But it isn't. They're not getting 19, they're only getting 13, and they have to pay for the charge-offs, and they have to pay for the cost of funds, and they have to run the business. That brings it down to somewhere in the 5% range, and I don't think anyone would argue a 5% return is outrageous.
Okay,
thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Carr, you had something to add to that?
I haven't done any study, but I'm a monetary economist, and recently what's happened is prime has fallen because of the fall in economic activity, but also the risk in the credit card business has gone up. So you would not expect to have a one-to-one correlation between the fall in prime and the fall in and the interest rate charged on credit cards. It's more expensive now given the high risk on those cards, and that has to be taken into account. When you have no change in the risk, you would expect closer correlation. But when they move in opposite directions, you wouldn't expect them to move together.
Thank you. Gentlemen, a number of the retailer organizations have told us that the contracts that they enter into with the credit card companies often restrict them from advertising a cash discount price. Some of the credit card companies deny that's the case, but there seems to be some discrepancy there. Have any of you studied what the impact would be of retailers advertising in all transactions a cash discount price, and what percentage of consumers do you think would be likely to take them up on that cash discount offer if it were offered?
I haven't studied it, okay. But and I don't know this dispute. All I know is the credit card companies tell me that you can do it, and we know in Australia it can be done. There's no change. We know here it can be done.
The question is, can you
advertise?
Can you advertise it? Right.
We're in Canada. I've got discounts for cash, and I've seen it advertised, and so there doesn't appear to be a problem. But it's still rare. Right. And you have to ask yourself, why is it rare? In Europe, it's rare. The argument has to be it's rare because cash is costly. Right. And therefore you don't want to put people. But for some places, you know, it isn't, and for certain transactions it isn't. Mr. Montclair worries about avoidance of income tax. Cash is one of the clear ways of avoiding income tax. If we want to pay for something and avoid income tax, you pay in cash. So that becomes a problem, and retailers may want to steer you to cash exactly for that reason.
Presumably, if consumers knew they had a cash option, maybe more would take advantage of it. I just want to ask Professor Skolnick a question. I was rather interested in your analogy of a shopping mall as a platform provider. And I know that mall owners often charge a base rent plus a percentage of sales done by the merchants in those malls. How do those fees compare with the actual cost of providing the mall facilities, for example?
I'm not an expert on shopping malls, but the economic argument for shopping malls is the notion of a platform is what the mall operators, their agenda, their game is to bring lots of merchants in and lots of shopping and shoppers in and provide this platform. And the second part of their business model is to then extract, these are businesses. Right. They want to make as much money as possible. That's their job. But the interesting part is, who do they get the money from? Who do they extract the money from? And what you don't see is when shoppers walk into the mall, the shopper has to pay to get into the mall. What you have is the shopper coming in free, but the merchants, the shops in the mall, they're the ones who are paying for essentially all the facilities that the mall provides.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Thank you, Mr. Decker. We'll just briefly hear from Mr. Carr.
Briefly, on your question, it's a very astute observation about taking a percentage of sale. It's equivalent in economics to what we call sharecropping, when you take a percentage. The percentage is done to give the right incentive to the mall owner to put the right mix of stores in. You as a retailer going in, you don't want another restaurant right beside you. You don't want another store competing. So they have, by giving the owner part of their rent in a share, they want to maximize the total revenue of the mall, and that gives them the right incentive by allowing them to take that percentage. So it's like almost an interchange fee. It provides the correct incentives to the various parties.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Monsieur Vincent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague, Mr. Robert Bouchard. Now, my colleague asked if there were no intervention, if there were no regulations in the years to come, what would happen? And he asked you if you had any studies to corroborate your assertions. And in fact, you're saying that everything is fine and good and that we're going to keep on the same track. And you didn't answer that question. So obviously that's your personal opinion. Mr. Lee, now, for the 2% cashback, merchants have to be competitive. So what are MasterCard and Visa going to do when they enter the market? They may charge an interchange fee at any rate, and there's not going to be any government regulation. Another question. In your opinion, if you were a banker and somebody wanted to sell a restaurant tomorrow morning and made a profit of 3.8%, and somebody who's going to pay with credit card would get 2% less, would this be advantageous for a bank to make the loan to somebody who wanted to open the restaurant and use the credit card? And you said that for merchants that do not want to use the credit cards, that they can just go somewhere else. So you're talking if somebody wants to book a reservation, they have to have a credit card, and so therefore there's a monopoly of the credit card issuers. And everybody else is caught up in this spiral. So, Mr. Lee, when you say that in order to be more competitive, well, I personally think that we're not going to get out of this mess. So explain to me how our consumers going to be able to get out of this.
Okay, to answer the question, you said I didn't answer what would happen, and then I'll come to your present question. What would happen if nothing is done in terms of price regulation? The trend is very clear from the empirical data. The amount of percentage of transactions accepted by cash or check are going to continue to decline, and someday in the not-too-distant future, I believe checks and cash will disappear. That's what I believe based on the empirical data. Point one. Number two, you said about Visa and MasterCard. I'm assuming that we will not regulate prices in that section of the economy. The phrase I use with my own students about wage and price controls is that you cannot put price controls on one sector because all the sectors are independent. Or to put it more colloquially, you cannot be half pregnant. You have to, it's all or not. All. You cannot regulate one sector of the economy because they're buying inputs from other sectors of the economy. The credit card companies hire people. They buy technology inputs. They buy broadcast wires, internet wires. So because they're interconnected with everybody else, if you regulate the prices in one sector, you've got to regulate everybody. In terms of the third point, the merchant does not have to accept credit cards or debit cards. If they feel so strongly that this is really unfair, they can demand it to every customer to pay cash. They can say to me, when I bought my dishwasher, you got to pay cash. And I'll say, I'm not going to patronize your business.
Sorry, Mr. Lee, but we can't say that tomorrow credit cards are going to disappear and that they won't, and merchants will not accept a credit card and that they can send their client elsewhere. That's not how things work, and that's not how business is done. Mr. Bernier, the question wasn't for you. You can speak when you're given the floor.
I want to answer your question. I think you're recognizing what I'm saying. It is in the self-interest of merchants to accept business credit cards and debit cards because it enhances and augments their sales. If they didn't take them, their sales would go down and they would probably go bankrupt. And they don't want that.
I agree with you. I agree with you. But you can't say that if we were to fix the interchange fee at 4.5% or 2%, well, at 2%, card issuers will work with that. But there's nothing preventing the rate from going up to 3 or 4.5%. There is no competition in this area. Right now, it's 2%. And if there is a way for them to make more money, they are certainly going to exploit that opportunity. So how can you endorse greater competition when the card issuers are in fact doing whatever they please? Things cannot remain as they are. Your argument simply does not hold water. We need regulations because credit cards companies are forcing merchants to shut operations.
Then Mr. Carr, and then we're going to move to Mr.
You
Menzies.
said that there is no competition, there is no alternative. Well, somebody called Bill Gates was quoted only 6 months ago as saying he could go into the debit card business because he said he could do it cheaper than anybody else. So if they set their fees too high, any of the companies, this is going to provide an enormous incentive to some entrant to enter the business and knock them dead with a lower, cheaper, better valued product. This happens all the time. Schumpeter called it the creative destruction. And if you put in price controls, you end creative destruction, you end innovation, and then we'll look like Cuba or some country like that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Carr, briefly.
Yes, Mr. Vincent.
Mr. Carr, you have the floor.
Mr. Vincent, you said that there's no study of a system with no regulation. Well, we do have currently no regulation. We have our experience of the last 30 or 40 years. And in the last 30 or 40 years, interchange fees have not changed at all. The nature has changed, but the average interchange fee is the same. So you talk about interchange, how do we know it won't go up? It stayed the same, and it stayed the same because it's set to balance the system. Visa doesn't make more money by charging more interchange fees. It's done in order to take account of the fact that they want to provide the correct incentives to the card issuers. If it went to 10%, they would not make 1 cent more.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mr. Menzies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this lively debate. I'm quite excited to hear the fact that the marketplace still does work. It's not just me that believes that. We have some other people out there that believe that the marketplace can work. I guess where I would like to go is, in a previous meeting, I had suggested to the Canadian Bankers Association and some of the banks that we didn't want to regulate this, and the media spun it as I chastised the banks. Well, if the truth be known, I was speaking broadly to all those involved in this industry, that they shouldn't be ashamed to make money on this system because customers demand it. They demand this system. And I'm glad to hear that there's some options out there. But I guess when we hear about the 6% of debts that are written off, the risk that we're proud of our banks are in good condition, but they're carrying more risk now, and they have no collateral for that risk. And I just, we want to make sure that we don't put in a 5% maximum interest rate on these cards, that we don't overregulate, and some of you have suggested that we've already gone too far, but others of you suggested that what we're doing with financial literacy is important, and that we make sure that consumers are treated fairly. Have we gone too far? Is the market working? Just some comments, if I could. Whoever might be interested.
Go ahead, Mr. Skolnick, and then Mr. Carr.
In terms of regulation, my view, I suppose I was reading the transcripts of the Senate hearings a few months ago on this issue, and I think the most interesting thing for me, certainly that came out of that meeting, was when the senators talked to people from the Competition Bureau. And what came out there was that the Competition Bureau, the competition authorities in Canada, are currently looking at the system, particularly under the Competition Act, the particular clause which talks about the abuse of a dominant position. And I think this is completely appropriate, and I was very intrigued to hear this. In other words, if there is a problem in the system, the relevant authorities to be looking at this is the competition bureaus, whether there's abuse of dominant position, whether Visa or MasterCard are doing things illegally. Because if they are doing things, abusing their dominant position, this could be a criminal offense, and they could be taken to court. And similar court cases, competition-driven court cases, have happened in Europe, have happened in the United States. And so I think that's the playing field where things should be happening in terms of the role of government. The Competition Bureau, Competition Tribunal, and as I think the people from the Competition Bureau told the senators, these things take time. It's very data-driven. They have to examine the issues very carefully. But I believe the good news is that they are looking at that. I think that is the appropriate field for this to be happening in, rather than Parliament or even the Bank of Canada to be involved in regulation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Mr. Carr, and then we'll go back to Mr. Menzies.
Well, now, given full disclosure is an issue, I should disclose that I did my PhD under Milton Friedman at the University of Chicago, and I'm a firm believer in the principle of operation of markets. The market is working, and if you take a look at the Canadian banking system, it's the envy of banking systems all over the world. We're being examined by the Americans, by the Europeans, as maybe we should go towards the Canadian banking system. We had a few banks with a large number of branches, as opposed to the United States, which had a huge number of banks with no branches. Their system didn't work. During the Great Depression, 5,000 U.S. banks failed, not one Canadian bank failed. We have a system that's working. Okay. Our payment system is working. Our banking system is working. We should not, and it's regulated. We shouldn't put more regulation in it on such things as interchange fees, which make it not work, which make it inefficient. We have a system that is working. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mr. Menzies?
My next question would be in a reference that Mr. Skolnick made to cell phones, and I'm very intrigued by, I appreciate the fact this system isn't broken, but can we make it better? And when you look at, I'm assuming you're referring to the African model where they're using phone cards, and perhaps you could explain how that debit credit system is actually working.
Thank you. That's a really excellent question, and I think it ties into my key point to this committee, which is that change will happen not through regulation, but through innovation, through new developments, through technology. And the example that you give is cell phones and the African model. In places like Kenya and places like South Africa, what you've seen in those countries is very, very poor people who don't have bank accounts. But essentially, in those countries, everybody has a telephone, has a cell phone, or at least has access to one. There's one in a village or a family or something. So what you've had in these countries, very poor, essentially is a payment system that is more sophisticated than we have in North America. Because what you've had is technologically, you have one cell phone, you buy something from somebody, you go to a store. You take your cell phone, you put it next to the store owner's cell phone, and there's a program, or to use the economic jargon, is a platform on both of these cell phones. You push a few buttons, and the money goes from one person's money that they've put onto the cell phone previously, so you don't have to walk around cash. You load up your cell phone with some money, and then it goes into the shopkeeper's account, so your account goes down, and the shopkeeper's account goes up. This is in Kenya. This is in China, are doing the same kind of things. So what you have, essentially, nobody has plastic. Nobody has a bank account. You have the emergence of a new, brand new, highly innovative competitor for the plastic credit cards from cell phones. Will this happen in North America? Absolutely. The question is not if, it's when.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. Thank you, Mr. Menzies, for those questions. Mr. Mulcair.
Monsieur le Président. Alors,
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to the question that was asked earlier, the example that I gave is that most professionals cannot become incorporated. The same applies elsewhere when we're dealing with a person who wants to buy RSPs using points, and there obviously is a net loss for the economy, even though there's a gain for the individual. Now, my question is for Mr. Skolnick and Mr. War.
I want you to tell me where the $2 came from to give to my lady with her shopping cart, because there seems to be a little bit of what we'd say in French, pensée magique here. We've got our two ladies in the Scotiabank ad walking out with their shopping carts. One of them is boasting that she just made $2 off her credit card. I suggest to you that they both paid $1 in more expensive groceries, but maybe you can set me straight and tell me where that money came from. Mr. Skolnick.
I believe the answer is actually quite simple. The money came from the interchange fee that the retailer pays. Essentially what you have is a completely predictable outcome that economic arguments would lead to, based on the notion of a platform, based on the notion of a two-sided model. If you recall, I gave you examples of Google or Yellow Pages or the mall, where one side is subsidized, usually the shopper, and the other side pays, usually the provider.
Can we understand each other, Mr. Skolnick, that if you say that it's $2 that have been the interchange fees paid by the retailer, he passes that on in the form of more expensive groceries?
Sometimes, if he can, but sometimes he can't. So what you had is and it depends on the market situation of each retailer.
Well, where does it come from? The $2 didn't fall from the air.
If the retailer is in a competitive market and can't pay and can't pass on the can't pass on the retail fee, that cuts into his profit. If the retailer has monopoly power, is the way economists describe it, then he can pass it on, and then it comes from the consumer.
Mr. Ware, you want to take a kick at this one?
Yes. I agree with my colleague Jack Carr. Actually, the answer is the cash is a high-cost form of payment, and so the consumer pays cash, pays $2 more for the good, as it should be, because he's using a costly form of payment, or she rather.
So you have a study that you've modeled that shows that there's a 2% increased cost for paying cash. You can prove that to me.
No, I can't.
My name is Thomas. I like having stuff proven to me.
No, I cannot, but I'm a believer in competition. I don't have a study.
But we're not here for wishful thinking about what we believe in. I want you to prove to me that cost is there.
Well,
have you got a study? Have you worked on this?
We look at prices. One of the things economists do is that we believe in competitive markets, prices
Politicians
will
talk about what they
move
believe. I want you to prove it
cost.
to me. You just said to me that the cash, paying with cash is so expensive for the merchant, oh me, oh my, and the other one's getting $2 back because she was kind enough to pay with a credit card, but you can't prove it to me.
But see, I would turn this around to you and say, I mean, every single market that we see in our economy, which we believe to be competitive, we would believe that prices correspond to costs. So
But
why,
you still can't
why
prove
would
it.
you not
don't have a
believe that in
study.
this
You don't
case?
have a validated economic study that proves what you've just said, that the cash is costing them at least 2% more.
I cannot cite one for you, no.
Okay, thanks. That's what I thought.
Thank you.
Mr. Skolnick
Mulcair,
wants
do
to
you
have another
any
shot.
further
Yeah.
questions? Okay.
Point. Very interestingly, a few months ago, the European Union, in a major antitrust case against MasterCard on this identical issue, the way they resolved the issue was precisely in the way that Mr. Mulcair is discussing, that the European Union decided that the interchange fee should be related to the extra cost of carrying cash. That was the test that the European courts put in place. And so, and they've done the studies and they've figured out a number, I don't know what the number is, and that has become the interchange fee in Europe.
Since we can ask you such a thing, perhaps you could provide to the greffier of the committee the study in question from Europe, and we'll all be able to get a copy of it.
Yes, Mr. Skolnick, if you could provide the clerk of the committee at some future date, that's the reference to that study or a copy of the study, that would be appreciated. Mr. Lee and then Mr. Carr.
I just want to answer Mr. Mulcair's question very directly. He said, where's the study? AEI, Brookings Institute, 2006, Washington, D.C., empirical study showing cash is more expensive than any other payment instrument. I presented it on my slides.
What's the percentage?
It's on the slides.
What's the percentage?
Okay. I didn't memorize it. It's on my slides.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Mr. Mulcair. We can get a copy of that study from the clerk and provide it to members of the committee. Mr. Carr? Order. Mr. Carr has the floor.
2 points. One is that the interchange fee should not be related to costs. So that's number one. The second thing is economists do studies, empirical work, and we look to see what happens. We know we have a system. If your argument was correct and that cash was cheaper, okay, and that it was more expensive to use credit cards, we should find, because there's nothing stopping merchants would say, you're coming with a credit card, it's costing me more, I'm going to give a discount for cash. The fact that we don't see it is proof. It's not proof, but it goes towards validating the proposition that it must be more expensive, because if it wasn't more expensive, what you would do is simply give a discount. Now, it's not true for all transactions. Different retailers may have different costs of cash and credit card, and some retailers may say, we're not going to accept credit cards, as Costco does. They have a very efficient model and they work. For other retailers, that doesn't work. And so what you find is, let the system compete. If cash is dominant, it will. If credit cards is dominant, it will.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Thank you, Mr. Mulcair.
In ending, just to say
We're
that
going to go to Mr. Van Kesteren now. The next round is to Mr. Van Kesteren. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to be splitting my time with one of my colleagues. So I'm going to just fire off 3 things. First of all, just a statement, and I appreciate what you've said about cash, I think, Mr. Carr, but I think you need also include, and I'm not trying to correct your presentation, but checks. I remember being in business and waiting till the end of the month and seeing if that check was going to bounce, that in the past is check. So the second thing is I've asked for a study, and I appreciate what you've just done for Mr. Mulcair, and I wonder if there is a study, and I've asked at a number of other witnesses, to follow consumer spending with consumer card use. In other words, is there a study that proves or disproves that as credit card use increased, the spending increased as well? So there's a net benefit for the merchant as well. And then finally, and you don't need to answer that one right now, but the one question I wanted to ask was, and there's been some talk about the credit card and how it has led to increased usage and possibly some problems with increased usage. So my question would be, is it the role of government to interfere with consumer habits? And does the government have aside from possibly making it mandatory to send a credit or send a pair of scissors with every credit card, is it the government role to correct or guard against bad behavior in credit card use? And I just open that up.
Go ahead, Mr. Carr.
Let me take one part of your question. You asked, is there a study that showed as credit card use has increased, consumption has increased? There is a study, and that study was quoted in the presentation of Visa. It's the Global Insight in Visa Canada study, the benefits of electronic payments in the Canadian economy. What that study shows, and it does a statistical analysis, is it looks at what's happened to the growth of credit cards and the growth in the economy. Now, it's not an easy matter, but if the argument is correct that credit cards are more efficient, it takes less transactions to make, less cost to make these transactions than other forms, it saves on resources. You know, before we had anything, we had barter, which was very efficient. People spend all their time in exchange and none of the time in production. So if you can spend less time exchanging and buying goods, you have more productive time for producing. So the argument is that since credit cards are more efficient in making exchange, they free up resources for production and output is higher. Okay, and that's what the Global Insight study shows. Now, from there, it's an easy step that with higher output, consumption is higher. The biggest factor affecting consumer spending is output and income in the economy. So that's where the link is, and that's the study you would have to go to.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. I think we're going to go to Mr. Lake. We have 2 minutes left. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Van Kesteren.
And nobody's addressed that yet. Is it the role of government to interfere with consumer spending habits? How do you see that? Should there be regulations?
Go ahead, Mr. Skolnick.
I think there's some role for government in terms of financial education, financial literacy. I think we know that financial literacy amongst the average person is very low. People make poor decisions because they have lack of education on financial issues. So there's a key role for government. I think there's another role for government in terms of transparency. When you get your monthly statement, it should be clear. You should be told that if you don't pay off your account or if you pay your minimum balance, it will take so many months or years to eventually get out of debt. All of these transparency issues are the role of government. However, beyond that, I think it's very hard for government to tell people what to do with their own money and their own credit cards.
Thank you, Mr. Skolnick. We're going to go to Mr. Lake now. He's got a few questions.
Yeah, I just actually have one question to wrap up our time here. In terms of price regulation, I get a little bit concerned when I hear people asking for price regulation. Maybe could you explain what would happen if we had a cap of a maximum interest rate on credit cards? What effect that would have on maybe cutting people off who might otherwise be able to get a credit card but couldn't? What other sort of maybe unforeseen consequences could there be to that kind of price regulation?
Go ahead, Mr. Carr.
Is this a cap on interest rates you're talking about,
Cap on interest rates, yeah.
It's usury laws, and a long time ago I wrote a paper which never got published on usury regulation. There's a huge amount of government regulation on interest rates, and it goes back to the Bible prohibiting any interest rates in Deuteronomy, if you want to know where the original quote comes from. But what happens is that if you go look at the history of this, banks never got involved very much in consumer lending, and consumers used to borrow from sales finance contracts at very, very high interest rates. Credit cards were a way, even though we think of them as high, but you have to look at the risk, the size, and the cost, were a way of providing a line of credit to consumers and at the lower cost than any other method for these particular consumers. If the government comes in and regulates the interest rate, we know what happens when they put a cap on it. The demand for the loans will go up and the supply of loans will go down, and banks will have to ration. There'll be people who will be squeezed out, who won't be able to borrow at all, and that can't be helpful. So you're not helping anybody to say, okay, you're not going to pay these high rates, it's these low rates. But guess what? A large number of you won't be able to get these low rates because financial institutions will not be adequately compensated for the risks they take at that low rates. So you'll just be pushing them out of the credit market.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Mr. McKay.
thank Professor Carr for that biblical reference. Possibly one of the recommendations of the committee should be that we should have a year of Jubilee.
Another interesting example.
Another interesting example
Yes.
of how to deal with that. The problem here is that this system has become incredibly Byzantine, that it takes an incredible amount of time just to sort of follow all of the transactions, et cetera, et cetera. And the issue is that at the tail end or the front end of the system is a load of rewards, points, bells, whistles, et cetera, which have effectively distorted the system. So Professor Lee rightly analyzed the Australian system, and there they tried to do something. And when you only try to do one thing in isolation, naturally the credit cards companies react and either load up fees or do something else. So that's the lesson to be learned in Australia, is either you do it all or you do nothing. So Professor Lee, you seem to be driving to a do-nothing argument, which is other than, we need more education and we need to be more literate and all that sort of good stuff, but really don't do anything. But don't we really want a credit card system that looks a little bit more like the interchange debit card system, which is basically runs on a cost or cost-plus system, and doesn't have a whole whack of bells, whistles, and rewards, incentives, et cetera, and then you'll actually get the best of both worlds. So I'd be interested in your comment on that.
This is a feature of the modern economy, the complexity of the product lines. What you were saying about all the whistles and bells, there's over 200 credit cards, reminds me of walking into a shoe store. It's just an amazing blizzard of options, or buying a car. In most consumer markets today, they're much more sophisticated than back in the 50s when you went into a store and they had two of everything. You had two choices. And if you go back even further, Henry Ford said you can have it in any color you want.
But aren't we talking about a blizzard of money here?
But
and really, do I need a blizzard of money in order to pay for all of those various shoes in the shoe store?
Okay, we're going to hear from Mr. Lee and then from Mr. Ware.
I'm answering your question. I mean, I said this is a feature of consumer product markets across the economy, number one. Number two, the consumer makes that choice. Those credit cards or those shoes or whatever that are not going to meet the needs of consumers will wither and die. And surely it's not the role of the legislators to determine, to pick winners and losers amongst product lines. So you've shifted from saying picking winners and losers amongst credit card companies to saying let's pick winners and losers among product lines. That's called business strategy, and that's the role of the entrepreneur, not of Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Ware, you had a comment to respond to Mr.
Just
McKay?
the answer to your question is no. We would not want a system like the Interact system for credit cards. It may have fortuitously worked well for Interact back in the mid-90s, but as I said earlier, we need to change it now. And just really to echo what Professor Lee said, this is a differentiated product market in which there are a wide variety of products available to consumers, and those are there because consumers demand a wide variety of products. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
I do wonder whether consumers demand these things or that they're told to want these things. And therein lies an incredible difference. When I'm paying for a product, I'm just paying for a product. I didn't even realize, and I think I'm a sophisticated consumer, I had no idea of all of the costs to the merchants and all of the things that were loaded onto my credit card, much to my surprise, which ultimately cost the system a great deal more money. So I agree with your point that the debit card system worked well, and probably the consent order has arrived, is at its best before date, has arrived. So, but you don't want to necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I look at the Bank of Canada costs of on a per transaction basis, and on a debit basis, it's about 2/3. The processing fee costs about 2/3 of the overall cost, Where if on the credit, it's about 90, the processing fee costs about 90% of the overall cost. So why wouldn't I want a credit system to look a lot more like a debit system so that ultimately I have more money in my pocket?
Okay, thank you, Mr. McKay. Briefly, Mr. Ware, and then we're going to...
Of course, there's nothing to stop you using a debit card to make a purchase, in which case you'll get that. And just on your point about variety is, you know, I mean, we could argue that consumers all want to wear white shirts, and if we just made them wear white shirts, then they'd all be better off. But that's, you know, that's not the kind of society we live in, and hopefully don't want to live there.
Thank you, Mr. Ware. Now we're going to just give Mr. Rajat, my co-chair, a chance to ask one or two questions before we adjourn for the day.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming in for your presentations for this very lively discussion. Mr. Skolnick, on page 4, you talk about the economics of two-sided markets, and you talk about a balancing act where a platform loses value if either side withdraws, and the objectives of the platform make as much money but still keep both sides using your platform, retailers and consumers. But is it a fair two-sided market there? Because retailers, I mean, in my view, I mean, you say there's an option of cash or check, but in reality, as Mr. Lee pointed out, that's a decreasing option, if it is still an option today, because me as a consumer, if I go into a store and they say you can't use a credit card, the reality is I'm going to frequent that store less and less. So is this a fair, I mean, of this platform, can you just address that it's not fair to retailers? It's sort of one side is much stronger than the other in this two-sided market.
And this is the very nature of two-sided markets. This is why two-sided markets are so different from what we see in the economics textbooks that we all teach. And you possibly are right. And I think the remedy, the way to fix this problem is through the competition authorities, and which is why I was pleased to see that the Canadian Competition Bureau is looking at this under the very specific element of the Canadian Competition Act, which is the abuse of dominant power. Because abuse of a dominant position. Because what Visa, you correctly say, Visa and MasterCard have a dominant position. They're different from the shopping mall. If they're abusing that, and we don't know if this is the case yet, but if they are abusing that, then the competition authorities and the competition tribunal should penalize them. But if they're not abusing it, then I would suggest this is the nature of two-sided markets, in that because you've built up your platform, because your platform is valuable, because people have to use the platform, some people will be subsidized and the other side will not be subsidized.
Okay, I wish I had more time, but thank you very much for clearing that up.
Thank you, Mr. Rajat. Before we adjourn, I just wanted to ask Mr. Lee if there's any more recent studies from that were conducted after October 2004, because one of the members of the committee asked me whether there were any more recent studies than the AEI Brookings working paper that was published in October 2004, in light of the fact that some more recent card products have been introduced since that date.
I've copied the study, the Brookings study, which, by the way, was 2006.
It was 2006.
And I have also copied onto the clerk's laptop the Bank of Canada 2008 study of merchant attitudes towards the relative cost of payments. I've also copied the Federal Reserve study of the Central Bank of Australia. So I've copied several studies for the committee.
Thank you. Perhaps we could clarify after the meeting exactly the dates of those studies with the clerk. Thank you all to the witnesses for attending. We appreciate your advice and your comments. Meeting is adjourned.